Hello, welcome. I am so happy to see you all today for the first webinar of 2026. Today, we're going to be talking about new paradigm leadership. This is something that I am particularly passionate about. And so I'm really happy to see all of you here today to share in this journey with us. I think new paradigm leadership is becoming increasingly important. And so we're going to really take a look at what it means to be a new paradigm leader and why this matters more than ever. My name is Robin Short. I am the founder and CEO of Workplace Peace Institute. And what I do here at the Institute is I work in organization systems design. What that means is that I work with leaders in understanding the system that's driving their organization and how that system is influencing human behavior, and then support them in creating a system that's going to, by the natural output of that design, support human behavior that's really grounded in peace and dignity. We do a lot of leadership development training and coaching here at Workplace Peace Institute. And I also work as a mediator and peace builder and diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. All of these different disciplines that I bring to the organization really influence all aspects of how I work with leaders in designing organization systems really grounded in peace and dignity. So, for today's learning journey, we're going to look at the core differences between traditional and new paradigm leadership and why this shift in paradigms is really important for creating organizational resilience and supporting organizations in really sustaining the innovation that's necessary to solve the complex problems that we're facing in the world today. And we're going to look at some key mindset shifts that are necessary for leaders to embrace to really be future ready leadership, to really embrace these ideas of new paradigm leadership. So, to get started, I would love to hear from you. What are some of the leadership challenges that feel most complex or overwhelming right now? And if you just want to share your thoughts in the chat, I'll read some of them out. What feels most particularly challenging for you? Changing structures in our society. Yes, I just before that was actually dropped into the chat, I was thinking to myself about how so much complexity that's happening in the world today is showing up in it's showing up in our bodies, and we bring that into the workplace, and it creates a lot of um, challenges as it relates to just navigating human behavior, gaining support from other team members who might not have the same excitement about projects. Yes, so being able to really cultivate a collaborative spirit in the organization. Thank you for that. Feel free to keep dropping those into the chat, and I will keep an eye on it as we move forward. But I want to add this, yes, changing how we structure our organization. It seems like we default to a patriarchal, super hierarchical structure, and I'm interested in learning a new model. You have come to the right webinar. I'm super excited to hear you talk about this. I will say at the offset that new paradigm leadership is doing exactly that, shifting away from patriarchal structures, shifting away from command and control, top down decision making, and really leaning into relationship. And really, particularly thinking about how. Power consciousness and healthy relationship to power dynamics can support us in our collaboration and ensuring that everyone feels like they are seen and that they belong. Awesome. You all have found yourself to the right webinar today. So There's some realities about leadership today that I think we need to talk about. There is constant disruption, and this disruption is happening from a lot of different places. One is there is so much disruption that's actually happening in society. For many of us, um, who are, really paying attention to what's happening in the world, we see a fragile democracy. We see old ways of doing things no longer really working. We're seeing a lot of social disruption. All of that comes with us into the workplace. There's a lot of shifts in terms of workforce expectations, what people coming into the workplace are expecting from the organization, and then what organizations have traditionally expected from the workforce, and how those things are not always in alignment anymore. Multi-generational teams. This is the most generationally diverse workforce in history. We have people coming into the workplace in their early 20s, working with people who are well into their 70s, who are still full-time working and fully engaged in their career. We've never seen this before, and it's changing dynamics in the workplace. And we're experiencing a significant amount of burnout, traumatic stress, and this leads to disengagement. This burnout and traumatic stress has a lot to do with what's happening in the world and how that's shaping the way we feel and how we're coming into the workplace. But the burnout and the traumatic stress is also really related to those patriarchal, super hierarchical structures that are no longer in alignment with today's workplace. So, leadership models truly must evolve. I believe very deeply that 20th century thinking is not going to solve 21st century problems. We're living in a time period that's very complex, that's changing very rapidly, and many people are facing challenges that they have no historic map for really knowing how to navigate. And traditional models of leadership were built for stability and predictability. And today's environment requires our ability to be extremely adaptable, extremely agile, in service to our ability to be very innovative. And when I think about, there's a lot of reasons that I think new paradigm leadership is really important, but one is our ability to be creative and our ability to be innovation. Our very best thinking comes from collaboration, and it comes from a sense and feeling of well-being. We don't do our best thinking under distress, and we don't do our best creativity under distress. And these patriarchal, super hierarchical traditional models that were built for stability and predictability are no longer creating an environment where we are able to really lean into creativity and innovation. So when we think about traditional leadership models, they're very authority based. They're very top-down decision making. So the people who sit at the very top of that hierarchy are both determining what we're going to do and how we're going to do that. And then there's attempts to move that information down the hierarchy. So it's very compliance-driven cultures and a focus on productivity and metrics. So this top-down hierarchical command and control thinking positions the people at the very top of that hierarchy to be making the decisions that move down and influence the rest of the organization. But the power structure itself makes it very difficult for the information at the grassroots to move up. And so very often you have people in these authority-based decision-making models making decisions without all the information. They don't have access to all the information because the structure itself is preventing a healthy flow of communication. I think about this as like a very healthy highway of communication where it can move up and down the hierarchy very fluidly and very openly and very transparently. But the traditional leadership model has a lot of barriers in place that prevent that grassroots information to move up the hierarchy. So when we look at this top-down command and control, hierarchical decision making, I think about this model as a Newtonian organization. And in Newtonian physics, the amount of pressure you put on something is the amount of movement that you get. So we apply pressure, we get productivity. We apply pressure, we get productivity. And that leads to a lot of burnout. And it leads to people feeling like they are kind of cogs in a bigger system and that they have to always stay in their lane. And they're not really able to bring all of their expertise, all of their wisdom into the workplace because the system itself isn't structured to be able to hold that kind of relationship. So in Newtonian organizations, you have different types, and these are labeled by colors, but the colors don't mean a lot. Red organizations are hierarchical, top-down command and control, but the glue that really holds this type of organization together is chaos and fear. So you get a lot of short-term productivity, but you also get a lot of burnout. And then you have amber organizations. Amber organizations are highly formal roles within a hierarchical pyramid, top-down command and control, and stability is valued above all through rigorous process, and the future is a repetition of the past. So, amber organizations are very often seen in nonprofits, in government institutions, in the military, often in religious organizations, and they've been a very stable part of society for hundreds of years. However, we're living in a time period where I believe looking to the past is not going to help us be successful in predicting the future. We're living in a time that's very chaotic, very complex challenges, and this very formal kind of bureaucratic approach to management is not going to produce the kind of collaboration that we need to really solve complex problems. Then we have orange organizations, and orange organizations are going to be the for-profit organization that many of us are very familiar with, where the goal is always to beat competition, achieve profit and growth, and we're always looking to grow and grow in order to continue to feed stakeholder expectations. And in an orange organization, very often you have the what we're going to do is being driven from the top, but then the how we're going to go about that is usually given a lot of freedom at the management level. This can create a lot of disparate experiences across an organization where different expectations and management styles create different experiences for people. So you may have a manager that is very collaborative in their approach, and then you may have a manager that's very hierarchical in their approach. And so it creates a disparate experience across the organization, which impacts both culture as well as productivity. So these are Newtonian organizations that really are where you're going to see traditional leadership. And this is probably very likely the type of organization that all of us are familiar with. This is what has shaped, if you are a Gen X person or someone from the boomer generation, probably a millennial, this is the experience that most of us have had. And we have our own relationship to how that has been effective and how that has worked for us as humans. So there are some strengths to traditional leadership. It supports us in scaling operations. There is an established structure that people are very familiar with. Whether we like it, whether we don't like it, we have probably figured out how to navigate it because it's very familiar to us. There can be increased efficiencies because of the way that uh, this kind of cog model where everyone knows their piece and what they're supposed to do. And in theory, you would have clear role definition in this type of model. Um, but there are ways that it begins to break down. In traditional leadership models, ambiguity can be very difficult for people to deal with. When you're working in this traditional model where the what we're going to do and the how we're going to do it is coming from the very top, and that gets communicated down to people on an as needed basis, then we don't have a lot of line of sight into the whole picture. And so ambiguity can feel very, very uncomfortable. When I work with organizations, what I have been hearing over the last 5 to 8 years is this very consistent communication from the workforce. We need transparent communication. We need transparent communication. And I think what they're really saying is the level of ambiguity that I am experiencing is creating an enormous amount of discomfort and lack of clarity in my ability to know how to do my job well. The traditional model limits innovation because we aren't able to really bring all of our expertise. There's this need to always stay in our lane. It definitely escalates mistrust and conflict because the system itself isn't designed for communication to move well. And the system isn't designed for there to be a natural, right relationship to power structures. So the way that traditional leadership models and Newtonian organizational systems are designed, the natural output is actually mistrust, instead of the natural output being extending the benefit of the doubt. And this can create a lot of conflict. And because the traditional model has this power over approach, people don't know how to navigate conflict well. And all of this ultimately ends up reducing engagement. So Gallup does an annual study of employee engagement in the workplace. I think it's called the State of the Workplace Report each year. And year over year, employee engagement is around 20 to 23%. During the early parts of the pandemic, when everything that we knew about how to show up in the workplace was really challenged. We were all coming into work every day, and then all of a sudden we had to work remotely, and we didn't have systems in place to do this yet. For this very, very brief moment, there was a big push towards collaboration, this big push towards really looking into the organization and seeking all the wisdom that is available to us to come up with some new ways of doing. And there was this little spike in employee engagement. And for the first time, it peaked over 30%, and then it dropped back down again. So what that means is that year over year, for as long as Gallup has been doing this study, more than 70% of the workplace is disengaged. And I find that to be just an astonishing waste of human potential and an astonishing waste of just productivity when we think about what we come into the workplace to do and to produce and the challenges that we're being faced to need to solve. We need to really flip those numbers so that our engagement is much closer to 70 and 80%. So that really is why I am so personally passionate about new paradigm leadership. In a new paradigm leadership model. So shifting away from this old paradigm and ushering in a new way of thinking and a new way of being and a new way of being in relationship with one another. New paradigm organizations are very values driven. So there's very clear values that shape how we are in relationship with one another and that shape how we perform our work. And we take those values very, very seriously. They're not just ideas that are posted on, the wall in the break room, but they really are the glue that holds us together. New paradigm leadership is human-centered. So we see all of the people in the building not as just their roles and their responsibilities, but whole human beings that are living in an extremely complex time and that are bringing all of that complexity with them into this community of the workplace that's come together to solve a specific need in society. And we're systems aware. So, in a new paradigm leadership approach, we're aware of how systems operate, and we're aware that the way a system is designed is going to influence the human behavior that we're seeing. So, in a new paradigm leadership model, when we see behavior that's not functioning in a healthy way. When we see behavior that I think of as maybe being not pro-social, isn't being supportive to solving complex problems, we don't see a people problem, we see a system problem. And we look to the system to see why this system is producing this type of behavior. And then we look to make course corrections in the system. New paradigm leaders are adaptive. So they know that the world is complex. They know that being agile to the people and the realities around us are going to be very, very critical. And we lean into relationships to support us in our ability to do that. And then that leads me to the type of organization that new paradigm leaders are supporting. So we have the type of leadership, but then we have the system that that leadership works in. And I think of these types of paradigms as quantum organizations. And in quantum physics, we understand the world around us through relationship. And we recognize that when you bring something new into the system, it shapes the reality. So in quantum organizations, power really moves through relationship in a power with model rather than a power over model. So it's very, very relationship focused. And there's different types of quantum organizations. One being the green organization, which I really think of sits on the cusp of Newtonian and quantum. This is still an organization that is the classic pyramid structure, but it's an organization that really focuses on employee empowerment, is very culture driven, is very values driven. And you can think about green organizations like maybe old school Southwest Airlines, where the culture really was vital to the way the employees would show up and perform their work. In my opinion, the challenge with a green organization is that it tends to have a club mentality. You either really fit in or you don't fit in at all. This is going to be the type of organization that probably has high turnover in the first 120 days of employment, and then the person stays there for decades. So you either churn very quickly or you stay for a very long time. This can produce a really for the people who fit, it can be a really extraordinary experience, but it's also going to reduce diversity in thinking, diversity in problem solving, and all of the benefits that come with having diverse perspectives. And then you have a turquoise organization. And in my opinion, the turquoise organization is really where the workforce has shifted to, and leadership is struggling to catch up with it. So when we think about this emerging workforce, Gen Z, young millennials, many Gen X are certainly, from a consciousness perspective, operating in a turquoise mindset. This is going to be an organization that's really fueled by the evolutionary power of life, meaning we know that things are always evolving and changing, and that the system itself is designed to evolve and change with that. So it's not rigid, it's a living system. And in a turquoise organization, there is still a leadership model. So there's hierarchy from the perspective of roles and responsibilities, but the role of the leader has changed. Instead of the leader being tasked with identifying the what we're going to do and the how we're going to do that, and then communicating that down, the role of the leader is to support collaboration, to build systems for collaborative decision making, to build systems that are supporting the employees in their own development, in their own growth. And so the leaders are really stewards of the system instead of owners of kind of dictating the how we're going to do something, like the how and the what. So this is really where we see that big shift that we talked about in the chat around moving away from this patriarchal, super hierarchical model into a model that's really designed for collaboration, for relationship building, for empowering innovation and creativity, and allowing people to bring all of their expertise and their wisdom into the organization. And then you have teal organizations, which I think is still a bit aspirational. Teal organizations are totally flat organizations. There is no actual leadership in the organization, and leaders emerge through expertise and knowledge. And so leadership is very fluid. I have worked with organizations that are attempting to be teal, and what I have found is that our conflict resolution skills and our leadership models have not caught up with this mindset. And so teal organizations tend to produce a lot of conflict and unintentionally revert to red. So at our work at Workplace Peace Institute, we're really focused on this turquoise approach. I think this is where the workforce is, and it's where leadership should be moving toward to really be in alignment with the current workforce consciousness. So when we think about this paradigm shift, what are we moving from and what are we moving to? We're moving away from authority-based decision making to influence-based decision making. And that requires a lot of collaboration. It requires a lot of relationship building. It requires a lot of conflict resolution skills. And it requires a lot of trust. We're moving away from command and control to collaboration. We're moving away from predictability to adaptability. And we're moving away from efficiency to sustainability. So this is the real shift that is being made from a old paradigm, traditional leadership, to a new paradigm approach. So when we think about new paradigm leaders, we're managing systems instead of managing people. And when we manage systems, then we're being intentional about designing a container that's going to produce a certain kind of behavior. And that container in a new paradigm leadership approach is going to be a container that's natural output is dignity. And natural output is what I think of as peace, which is human security and the ability to live a life of dignity without fear of that being taken away from me. So when I'm able to achieve my human needs in the workplace, when I experience my inherent worth and value as a human being in the workplace, I know that that's coming without conditions. It's not going to be taken from me if I don't then show up in some prescribed way. So, new paradigm leaders understand that organizations are living systems that evolve and change as in relationship to the world around them, and that are evolving and changing in relationship to the needs that the organization is meeting in the world. They're very culture driven. So, in a new paradigm organization and with a new paradigm leader, the leaders see themselves as stewards of culture and to continuously be embedding that culture into work life. And that leadership shapes trust and engagement. That the role of the leader is to ensure there's consistent trust individually, collectively, and at the organizational level in service of our ability to be really engaged in the workplace, to be enthusiastic about our work, to be enthusiastic about our work life, and to be able to really bring all of our creativity and cognition in service to the mission. We also know as new paradigm leaders that complexity is the new norm. There isn't some light at the end of the tunnel that we're working towards. We are living in a highly complex world, and that is what is normal. So we know that there's going to always be competing priorities that we're going to have to be able to navigate through healthy relationship, that we're always going to be moving through very rapid change cycles, and that emotional workforce dynamics are always going to be at play. Um, I can't stress enough that what happens in the world outside of our workplace is impacting us at like the human body level, at the somatic level, at the psychological, emotional, and spiritual level, and we bring this with us into the workplace. And so new paradigm leaders are trauma informed. They know how to navigate conflict in a power conscious way, because we're not going to be able to separate the fact that our emotions are very activated and that that's driving workplace dynamics. And we understand that there's interconnected systems, that as we make a change in one place, it's going to have a ripple effect somewhere else. And we're able to think about our problem solving from a systems perspective. Um, New paradigm leaders also recognize that their role is to really support organizational resilience. So when we think about resilience, what we're thinking about is how quickly are we able to bounce back from adverse situations. And I like to think about resilience from the perspective of like a penny bank. If I'm taking withdrawals out, is there something that's making deposits to ensure my penny bank doesn't get empty? And in an organizational perspective, some of the things that put deposits in is psychological safety. Psychological safety, we can think about psychological safety from the perspective of people feel like they can speak, contribute, voice their concerns without any fear of humiliation or any fear of retribution. I think that also comes with psychological agency. So it's not just that I'll be able to say it, but should be expectation that I can contribute in a meaningful way without fear of humiliation, without fear of retribution. Something that's really important to understand about psychological safety in the workplace is that every single human being in your workplace, in your organization, is bringing every trauma they ever had and every other organization with them into this place. So, as a leader, you may be thinking, I don't understand why people feel so scared. I don't understand why there's so much fear. There's nothing in this system that would suggest that you would be humiliated or that you would experience retribution, but they're bringing that with them from every experience they've had into this place. So, a new paradigm leader is being very intentional about cultivating psychological safety because we know we don't actually have a clean slate. We are being held responsible for every experience every single employee has had previously. Um, Another aspect of building organizational resilience is learning agility. Um, and so, what I mean by that is that we can recognize that we have enough humility to recognize that what I knew before that was very helpful information that really helped me to solve the problems may not actually be the knowledge, the skills, or the expertise that's going to solve the problem today. So there's this ability to be continuously focusing on learning, unlearning, and learning again. That we're facing challenges that are really unprecedented, and that we're going to have to be in this constant state of evolving in our knowledge in order to be able to really show up for the challenges that we're facing. Um, Another aspect of organizational resilience is conflict competence. In a new paradigm leadership approach, where we're being where the task is to support collaboration. The task is to ensure that we're really able to source all the wisdom, all the expertise that lives inside of an organization. It means we're going to have to be able to engage directly with conflict. One of the I think, most damaging approaches to traditional leadership models is that we conditioned ourselves into believing that we didn't have power. That every time there was a challenge, I would take that to my leader. I would take that to the person who has more power than me, and they would solve that problem. And very often we would be disappointed with the result. But we were conditioned in a system that taught us that someone with more power would solve my problem. And in a new paradigm approach and in a new paradigm organization where power moves through relationship and where collaboration is our goal, we have to be able to directly engage in conflict, which is really about taking our power back and knowing that we have agency and power to solve our own problems. But it's very unfamiliar for people. So, new paradigm leaders are conflict competence. And these things, this commitment to psychological safety, this humility that comes with constant learning, the ability to be conflict competent builds trust. And the more trust we have, the more benefit of the doubt that we're able to extend to one another, the more grace that just actually lives inside of an organization. What I think is really important for leaders to know is that the workforce has already shifted. So if there are people in this room who are 24, 25, 30, 33, they're probably hearing information that's like, yes, this new paradigm approach is just that's what I expected. This is what I thought was going to be normal. And so a lot of the trauma that I'm actually seeing in organizations is that the workforce is a little jarred by the traditional leadership approach. As they came into the workplace, they were having a different expectation because the consciousness has already shifted, but leadership hasn't caught up yet. So this is leading to increased turnover, increased burnout, both at the leadership level and at the employee level, lower rates of engagement. I believe that the 2025 Gallup report showed engagement at 22%, that only 22% of employees are engaged in their work and work life. And then obviously the innovation is slowed and stagnated. So it's really critically important that the workforce consciousness and the leadership consciousness begins to come into alignment. So there's a couple of mindset shifts that are important for new paradigm leaders. And I'm going to ask you in a few minutes to share your thoughts about which of these mindset shifts seem most challenging to you. So as we go through these next 5 slides, kind of be thinking which of these do you think are going to be the most difficult for you? And then we'll share this in the chat. So the first mindset shift is shifting from authority to influence. That as a leader, the role power that I have, the actual power that comes with my role, needs to be leveraged to influence behavior rather than to use that as a way to uh, move the organization through a power over approach. So that looks like really prioritizing our ability to build trust capital. What is preventing people from trusting me? What behaviors am I demonstrating that maybe are low trust? And what behaviors do I need to adopt to really cultivate trust in the relationship with the people that report to me, on the teams that I lead, etc. Leading through credibility and inspiring voluntary fellowship. So people just naturally wanting to follow you because of the trust, because of the relationship capital that you build with people, because of the credibility that you demonstrate as a leader, because of your ability to support people in collaborative decision making, etc. So shifting from authority to influence. The next mindset shift is moving from control to adaptability. I will say for me, the biggest lesson of the pandemic was surrendering control. My stress coping mechanism used to be planning. I would just, when things felt very stressful, I would go and build a plan and work the plan. And what the pandemic taught us was that every plan is going to get blown up. And so it was no longer a way for me to cope with my stress. And I had to really learn how to become much more agile as a way of actually coping. So, this shift from control to adaptability is really looking at responding to emerging realities, recognizing what just came to mind for me is this book, Emergent Strategy. If you haven't read the book, I highly recommend it. But really realizing that we need to be very present moment thinking and be present to the realities as they emerge and trust that they're going to. Trust that things are going to always evolve and change and to be present to that evolution. Empower distributive decision making. So, one of the things that we do at Workplace Peace Institute when we're doing culture work with organizations is we bring together a team of people who are going to co-create a change plan. And this team is always representative of individuals across power structures, individuals across functional areas, and really specifically when we're looking at who we want to bring into this team, people who have a lot of social capital. Because the more social capital they have, the more they're able to bring maybe the doubters along with them. And then that distributive decision making is helping the organization to make change through all of the wisdom that lives in the organization. It always inspires me, it excites me, and I'm always kind of in a state of awe of how much wisdom lives in an organization and how much of that wisdom is left on the table when we're operating from this traditional command and control approach, that so much wisdom just never gets accessed because of that. So shifting from control to adaptability is really beginning to focus on distributive decision making. And then valuing experimentation, not being afraid to fail, really leaning into trying new things and see what happens, but then treating those mistakes as learning opportunities, and then building processes that help us to really mine all of the learning that came from these mistakes. So, really valuing experimentation. The next shift is shifting from individual to collective intelligence. And that really speaks a lot to that distributive decision making model. So, valuing collaboration over competition. Um, a new paradigm leader sees the peers they have in their field as just that, peers, not competitors. And so, we as we shift from this individual to collective intelligence, we really begin to look for opportunities for collaboration in every kind of way, knowing that this consciousness of competition has winners and losers. And when we look at collective intelligence, we're really looking at how do we all win together. Leveraging diverse thinking. So, really looking intentionally for people whose ideas are different. I used to, many years ago, I had a colleague who would always say to me, "Tell me where I'm wrong." And I think the way that he said it was a little bit aggressive, and I think it kind of put people off. But what he was saying is, find the holes in my thinking. I want to hear the diverse perspectives. So we're really looking for all of the diverse thinking to inform how we're going to collaborate together in our problem solving and then co-creating solutions together. As a mediator, I see the value in co-creating solutions. When we co-create solutions, we're bringing many thoughts, many ideas, many lived experiences together to solve a problem, but we're also making that solution much more sustainable because it has the shared wisdom that has contributed to it. So this mindset shift of individual to collective intelligence. The fourth one is conflict avoidance to conflict intelligence. Conflict avoidance is many of us were conditioned in family systems that avoided conflict, or we were conditioned in family systems that were hyper competitive, and then that produced conflict avoidance as a result. But conflict avoidance in an organization creates so much increased conflict, increased trauma, increased experiences of lack of safety. So this, I think, is one of the really important new paradigm mindset shifts is really being intentional about growing our conflict intelligence. And later in the year, we'll have a webinar on a conflict intelligence model that I've created. So I hope you'll sign up for that. But as we think about conflict intelligence, we begin to see conflict as data. And that data can be an innovation driver. So, one of my mentors, Ken Cloak, he says that conflict is the cracks in a system. It is a paradigm shifting. So, when we begin to see conflict surface, we can look at it as data and say, what is not working in this system? So, it's a shift away from seeing people as problems to seeing systems that are producing something that's not functioning the way we thought it would, and seeing that as data to drive innovation. Conflict intelligence supports us in clarifying relationships, in being in right relationship with each other, and it acts as a systems diagnostic. So this shift away from avoiding conflict because it makes us uncomfortable to really leaning into conflict and seeing all of the benefits that it can bring to healthier relationships and to healthier systems. And then lastly is shifting from short-term to long-term sustainability. New paradigm leaders are going to be leaders that are able to stay in an organization long enough to see the change in the culture, to see it shift from Newtonian to quantum, and then have the measures and mechanisms in place so that it becomes sustainable, so that this system is now self-correcting, self-perpetuating, self-maintaining in a new paradigm approach. So this is really focusing on culture durability. What do we need to embed into the culture to ensure that it's sustainable? Leadership pipeline development and trust ecosystems. So as we look at these 5 mindset shifts, I would love to see in the chat which of these mindset shifts feel most challenging to you. So this question in the chat about when you utilize conflict, a collective intelligence, where does the final decision lie when a clear path doesn't appear from the collaborative process? A couple of years ago, I realized that very few people have gone through any kind of learning and development around decision-making models. And so I've developed a workshop on collaborative decision-making models that actually support you in being able to answer that question. When you go into a decision-making process, having intentionality about the model you're going to leverage for that problem solving, everyone has agreement around that, and then baked into that model is exactly that answer. Where does the final decision actually lie? So in a collective intelligence, you're actually leveraging identified processes that people understand so that you don't just reach impasse. It's mindset shift 1 because of the first bullet point, build trust capital. This person identifies as autistic and finds that a lot of autistic behaviors, such as avoiding eye contact, etc., is read as being untrustworthy. That is, thank you so much for lifting that up. And I think that really goes to why it's really important. Someone had mentioned at the beginning about really being interested in creating workplace cultures where people experience belonging. And we can't create a space of belonging without having understanding and learning, both from like gaining actual knowledge, but also through real relationship with people across a diverse spectrum, so that we are able to better understand why we show up the way we show up, and to also be able to have enough relationship capital to be able to learn from one another. So thank you for lifting that up. Moving to conflict intelligence is where I will need much more, and I'm excited that we'll have a follow-up webinar. Excellent. So, so I want to share some competencies of new paradigm leaders that can give us a roadmap to start looking at how we can begin to develop this. So one is emotional intelligence. When we think about rapidly changing processes, living in this world that's changing all the time, needing to be conflict intelligent, really prioritizing collaboration. We need to be able to have a lot of self-awareness and social awareness and self-regulation and social regulation in order to do all of that from what I think of as a steady nervous system, a nervous system that's not very reactive and that provides a steady presence for others. We need to learn more about how systems operate so that we can be good stewards of designing healthy systems and maintaining those healthy systems. We need conflict fluency and collaborative facilitation skills. So we obviously have a gap that too often leaders are promoted for their technical expertise and not for their expertise in these particular competencies. Um, they have little to almost no formal leadership development, and the leadership development that people have had is very disparate. So oftentimes organizations don't have a pathway of development for leaders so that all of the leaders are being stewards of the same new paradigm approach. And we need frameworks for modern complexity. So all of this requires leadership development and it requires practice. We need transformation that is both reflective and put into action, and we need peer learning and coaching. So we have developed a new paradigm leadership cohort. There's a cohort that starts every year. This next cohort will begin April 8th, and it's a 6-week, 18-hour new paradigm leadership cohort that offers structured leadership transformation journey. It offers deep skill development, learning together as peers. Um, and in this cohort, there is live facilitated sessions, real world application projects, leadership coaching support, and a community of practice so that you are learning together in relationship with peers. You're able to apply that learning to real world thinking. You get support to be able to integrate that, but then there's also a community of practice that supports you in being able to sustain that with your peers. This program is designed for everyone. So emerging leaders, mid-level managers, senior leaders, and of course, HR professionals. I have found a sweet spot for this is emerging leaders and mid-level managers because they are not having to unlearn a lot of information. They're able to step into this as without the struggle and the resistance of unlearning things that they've experienced before. But in a beautiful world, we have a diverse group of people coming together in the cohort for shared learning with each other. Um, Cohort learning supports accountability. It supports shared insight. I think one of the things I love most about it is hearing the different leaders in the cohort share their own experiences and learn together through community, and then also long-term integration. So I'd love to see in the chat one leadership shift that you think you can begin to explore today as a result of our learning here together. Conflict intelligence, thank you. And as you're thinking about that, I'll just share this last slide about the new Paradigm Leadership Certificate Program. It's a 6-week course that starts on April 8th. I'll be sharing this recording with you. There'll be a link to the cohort so that you can learn more about that. And I'm so happy for all of you who joined us today.